Well, good evening, adoption community, and welcome to another episode, a late night episode of Adoption Happy Hour, brought to you by the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, also known as NAAP, where it is our mission to bring unity to our community by elevating the diverse voices of the adoption constellation. I'm Marcie Keithley, along with Jennifer Falsing and Beth Story, who are fellow board members and joining in the Zoom room to help tonight. Do we have any other board members? David, raise your hand, be recognized. David is a board member. Let's check and see if anybody else is here tonight. I know Barb's, if she's not here yet, she will be joining us. Okay. And David, while we just recognized you, would you mind sharing a little bit about your upcoming meeting?
Certainly. In collaboration with the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, we have endeavored to begin an Adoptee Path to Recovery virtual support group. We host that every other Tuesday evening, 8:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 Pacific Time. It's a place for individuals endeavoring to make healthy choices and lead a recovery lifestyle who have also had relinquished experiences to join and meet for camaraderie, validation, and to build that trust that so many of us find vital in our recovery. So please join us for our next meeting, August 10th, and I will put a link in the chat box.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Okay, before we introduce our guest this evening, we just want to tell you a little bit about us because we know we have some new faces here this evening, and do a little housekeeping item. Okay, so for those of you that don't know us, we are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents. We do host an annual conference in Indianapolis each year, which is scheduled for September 9th, 10th, and 11th. We host a lot of these virtual support networking groups, as you just met David. We publish a quarterly newsletter. We partner with other not-for-profits. Our website is chock full of resources. If you have an organization, a book, a podcast, anything of that nature that you would like to be listed on our resources page, you can reach out to myself or any of the board members. We'd be happy to add you. Tonight's broadcast will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel later on. And
I'm working on it. There we go.
Okay. Okay, and we just want to remind everyone to remain muted. Raise your hand on the screen to be recognized. You're welcome to start posting questions and comments through the chat bar. We encourage that. This is the public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. All of the events are recorded and this event is totally recorded and shared on our YouTube channel. If you're experiencing a serious mental health event or suicide thoughts, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. Okay, at this time, it is my privilege to introduce our guest this evening, Garen Wade. Welcome, Garen.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, we're excited to have you.
So happy to be here.
Great. Yeah, I just wanted to read just a little bit about Garen's exciting book that came out. His memoir, You'll Always Be White to Me, was released on June the 15th. It is available only on Amazon. We'll provide the link and some contact information on the book. This transcendent memoir is an international coming-of-age story that explores how the heart of an orphan grew to love a world that didn't always love him back. You'll Always Be White to Me asks us who we are, what our common humanity is, and if it's possible to look beyond our color and find our way there. So let's dig in.
All right.
This is a story of the intersection of love, family cultures, racism, and identity. And this memoir is chocked full of themes, adoption just being one of them. So let's start out, Garen, if you would just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and your family.
Sure. So first of all, for everyone that stayed up late, I really appreciate this. And I'm very grateful. Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Garen Wade, and as Marcie said, I'm the author of my memoir, You'll Always Be White to Me. It is my first book. It's my last book. I don't really have plans to write anymore, but I for many years have wanted to get this story on paper. And I live in Fort Lauderdale now. Have lived here since 2016 with my husband and our 2 sons. Not only am I adopted, but I am an adoptive father. So we have adopted a son from Washington and then also from South Africa. So, it's been very interesting, I would say, to sort of see adoption from so many different perspectives and have the opportunity as an adult to, to really have plunged into both domestic adoption and international adoption. So I feel like this is such a perfect forum for me to be in, because my life really is very much informed by adoption, and has changed my life really.
And let's talk a little bit about how your life began. You were in 1985. You want to tell us about that?
Yes, so I was born in 1985 in Sri Lanka during the Civil War that went on for many years. Some of you may be familiar. And I was left on the steps of a hospital. I don't know how long I was there. It wasn't the day I was born. It was sometime after that. Somebody picked me up, and I assume went in and asked, is this anyone's baby? No one claimed me. So I was taken to an orphanage in Kandy, which is like the mountainous interior of the island. And I was in an orphanage for a very short time. The orphanage deemed I was too malnourished to stay. And so they transported me to Colombo, where I was put into a malnutrition center. It just so happened that there was a white American couple from Louisiana who was living there at the time. They had just adopted a little girl from the Philippines, had moved for work to Sri Lanka. They wanted a boy, and I was the only boy. So they adopted me, and that's where my life started in 1986, in October 1986, when I was adopted by my parents, and that's the beginning of my story.
And your parents, Nikki and Steve, let's talk a little bit about them. Let's enter this world because it's pretty fascinating.
All right, yeah, sure. Yeah, Nikki Wade and Steve Wade. Really, I love my parents so much. I have such respect for them, and they were, I think probably by a lot of people's measure, quite extraordinary people. They were a football player and a homecoming, sort of like a darling on the homecoming court in Louisiana, who then had never traveled a lot, hadn't done much in the world, and they decided they were going to go to the Peace Corps. So they ended up flying to Africa and working as Peace Corps volunteers, first in Botswana. That led to their international career. That's eventually why they made their way to both the Philippines and Sri Lanka. My mom was a lot of things. She had studied to become an anthropologist. She was a sex education teacher. My father worked in international development. They said that the experience in Botswana kind of changed their entire life, the way they saw the world, the way they felt about race issues. And they had trouble conceiving a child. So that's why they started down the road to adoption. And I feel lucky that I found a home with them.
So we have in your family, there were 5 of you. So
Yeah.
Ebony is the oldest, you're the middle, and then they had a biological son.
Yes. So when we moved to South Africa, we left Sri Lanka when I was 3.5. We moved to South Africa. They, had a baby, and it was a surprise to them. It was a surprise to us. But then now I had a little blonde brother. So, we were quite the family. You have to imagine in apartheid South Africa. So Nelson Mandela is still in jail. It's still very much illegal to have an interracial relationship. Very few families are walking around with the constitution of our family. And so here's this family in 1990 in South Africa with a Sri Lankan son, a Filipino daughter, a blonde American son, 2 white parents. It was definitely, we stuck out, I'm sure.
And so while we're in South Africa, let's talk about that. You didn't stay in South Africa forever, because in your life, you become this international traveler.
Yes.
And you spend your summers, culture shock, in Louisiana. So
Exactly.
you're going the Gambia, Hawaii, Jordan, Egypt, Jamaica. And then the summers you go to grandma and grandpa's where your mother was raised.
Right. So we knew that we were American, right? Like that's what we were told, but I'm not sure that we felt that. What we knew is that each summer we got on a flight. Well, we got on like 5 flights at that time, right? And traveled back to South Louisiana. And my mom and my dad was actually from Louisiana as well, but they were raised in a very small town on the west bank of the Mississippi River. And that was our introduction to America. I mean, I think for a long time, I just felt like America was Southern culture, and not just Southern culture, but Louisiana culture. And so that's where we, this rainbow family, found ourselves in this, a place that very much didn't reflect our family. I mean, everyone was white. I do feel at that time there was a lot of racism. We were the only brown kids on the street, with the exception of my brother. And my grandparents, who had raised their daughter in this small town, like never imagined that she would, go across the world, adopt these babies, and then come back each summer to that small town. Now, I do want to say, like, I fell in love with that town early on, and through the memoir, no matter where you go in the world, because we go a lot of places around the world, we always come back to a very small town called Luling, Louisiana, on Bernice Drive. You guys will be very familiar with that. And that is where my grandparents lived. And so I feel like it's an exploration of these two worlds, this very diplomatic international world we were growing up with, ambassadors' kids and aid workers, UN workers, and then boom, fly to South Louisiana where, you can imagine people were living this very small town life, very beautiful sort of American life that was deeply unfamiliar to me. But nonetheless, I sort of found it very enchanting.
And why don't you introduce your grandmother and grandpa to our guests this evening?
Sure. So central to the memoir is my grandmother and my grandfather, my mom's parents, Asho and Grandpa, who you meet at the very beginning, and then they become sort of a very big part of the memoir, because they struggled with my mother's choices. They initially felt bad that she couldn't conceive a child. And then when she adopted brown children, it was like not something they ever expected. And you go through kind of their transition over decades, trying to understand us, trying to understand what that meant for their life, them having basically the only brown grandchildren in this town. And they were characters. I think both of them are such characters. What do you think, Marcie? You've read it.
Well, I'm a fan of your grandmother.
Yeah.
So bless her heart. But and Grandpa in the garage teaching you how to smash beer cans.
Right. Right. Yeah. So my grandpa would have me outside at age 5, 6, smashing his beer cans with a sledgehammer, and then so they would flatten to these, I call them aluminum pancakes, and then he would take them down to the corner store to get money for them. You can just imagine that life was just so different from what I was living around the world. Yeah. And
that's just it. You're living in two worlds, and you're being raised. You're a brown person being raised by a white couple, going all over the world, and then you go to Louisiana.
Yes.
So how those two worlds collided.
Right.
And they didn't collide.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking how they collided?
Yeah, how they.
Oh yeah, I mean, when we were kids, not only was my mom a sex ed teacher, but they were so progressive. They were on the forefront of maybe every movement. I always said that I felt like they taught me at a young age the importance of respecting all people's rights, especially standing up for minority groups in whatever way that is. And so you sort of had this education at home, and then you fly back to Louisiana where no one talked about sex. Black people were bad. Mexican people were dirty. And my grandparents hadn't really traveled, that much outside of the country. So they didn't really they were very patriotic, extremely so. and would say like America's the best country in the world. And I remember even as a young kid being like, how could you know that, because you haven't been anywhere else? And here we had been to so many places and seen just the beauty and diversity of the world. Yeah, from a young age, I knew that it was always very, very different to go back there. And it wasn't all negative, it was in many ways, like I said, very enchanting, very kind of mystical. The swamp. I don't know how many of you guys have been to Louisiana, but the topography there is just so different than anywhere in America. So you come into this place where you have the bayous and swamps and alligators, and it's just the interstate goes over, or it's all built on bridges, and the food and the Cajun accents. It was sort of, it felt to me like another country. And I always say it really was another country to me, because I wasn't living there, in America.
And it was there in Louisiana that you had your first experience of racism.
Yes. So in South Africa, my sister and I were not allowed to, I was not allowed to take part in a children's recreational center where they had gymnastics and karate and taekwondo, because it was apartheid still, and they said I was too dark. So actually that story in the memoir is sort of a nice one, because after sort of a big political kind of fallout, we became the first brown children to ever be allowed to be in those classes with white children. But I was pretty young then. I was 4 or 5. So I don't feel that it resonated in the way that what Marcie's speaking about, it did by the time I came to Louisiana in the summers. And I started biking up and down Bernie's Drive with all these kids, all white boys who lived in his neighborhood. And one day, one of them, I'm not sure of the situation, one of them got angry at me. It was the first time I was called the N-word. I knew what it meant, but more than that, I talk about that I knew how badly it felt. And in a way, in the summers there, I tried so hard to fit in. I mean, all kids do, I think. I tried to somehow, I wanted to be like them. I wanted to sound like them. I wanted to say y'all. I wanted to, know what football was. I wanted to be like, know about the Saints. And I want, all of that stuff as a young kid. And, it was just so clear to them that I obviously didn't belong. And that was my first time feeling the pain of, racism. And of course that was very early, and there would be many more instances to follow, right?
Mm-hmm. You want to share a little bit about what happened on the plane after?
Sure. Oh, sure. I think in America, we sort of frame racism as, we often think of it in terms of, discrimination against Black people. And of course, I think over the years, we've seen it just everything. It kind of applies to so many different minority groups. But one thing that I don't think I was ever prepared for was, we're jumping ahead here, Marcie, of course, right? But I did end up living in the Middle East in a country called Jordan for middle and high school. And I was there on 9/11. And shortly after 9/11, I was on a transatlantic flight back to the United States. And I sat down in my seat, and there was a blonde American woman from Texas sitting next to me. And she told me with a deal of great pride that she felt that I looked like the terrorists from September 11th. And I've said in other interviews that, that was like more hurtful to me than almost anything else, because, of course, I wasn't, one, prepared for it. And two, I mean, comparing someone to a terrorist is, I feel, is basically the worst thing you could, say. So I also have explored through the memoir how many different kinds of discrimination can take place in different countries and different cultures based in different situations. Yeah.
Okay, let's shift topics and let's go right to talk about violence. There is a piece in your memoir about violence, and you want to share a little bit of that story?
Sure. Are we talking domestic or Al-Qaeda?
Domestic.
Domestic, yes. Well, I came to the United States in 2004, and I just graduated high school from the Middle East, from the American Community School in Amman, Jordan. And I sort of always knew, when I graduated, I would go to America, because my parents were American, and also we were always like saying we're American, but we didn't really know what that meant. So I thought I should go to America. I should find out, what does it mean to be an American guy, kid, person? And very well, after my first year, I got into a relationship with someone named Chad. And Chad was on the outside, this very handsome, very eloquent, everyone liked him, seemingly confident person. You know, maybe the kind of the bad boy that a lot of people fall for. I mean, he rode a Ducati, had a blue mohawk, like it was sort of all the wrong things, right? But of course, at 19, I was like, oh, he's so attractive. And we ended up in a almost 3-year relationship. So most of my college was in a relationship with him. He was an alcoholic, that I learned very quickly. But he did also try to kill me. And that has been and continues to be a source of, you know, I hope none of you have ever had someone try to kill you, but it is, you know, it will stay with me forever. That's the thing, it will stay with me forever. I'm 35 now. I still talk about it with my now husband. I mean, it's something I'll always kind of move through. And, you know, it was very difficult to be in that moment. And I do, of course, write about this in the memoir, where someone is trying to end your life. And I feel very lucky that I didn't die that day. And yeah, it's a very, even now it doesn't seem like it's my life when I speak about it, because I would have never imagined that I would have ever been in that situation.
So that leads up to my next question about memoir. Why the memoir and why now? You know, it's a very ambitious goal to write a memoir, to put it out there. And it takes a lot of hard work and time. So why
Right.
now?
Yeah, and you would know, yeah. Why now? When I came to the United States in 2004, so many people would ask me, well, where are you from? That question elicited a very sort of long, and never really knew what to say. Like, I was adopted from Sri Lanka. I grew up in South Africa, Hawaii, Jordan, Gambia, Jamaica, Louisiana. But I'm coming from the Middle East. My parents are, you know, it was very hard to, but when people would dive into the story, they would say, like, you've got to write about your life. Like, we've never heard about someone that kind of grew up in this way. And I thought, I'm 21, I'm 22, there's no way. You know, there's no way for a lot of reasons, right? One, I still hadn't got it figured out. I was still trying to come to terms with my sexuality. I knew there was so much I wanted to achieve in terms of a career. I knew I wanted to have a family, but I didn't know how. All those things, you know, came into play, and it didn't feel like, I just also felt like, who wants to read a memoir by someone in like their early 20s? Is anyone gonna want to read that? So I never did. And I went about my life and I achieved things I wanted to, stumbled, got back up, found myself a bit more, right? As we all do in our 20s. And I say that, like, right around the time that Colin Kaepernick, you guys remember when Colin Kaepernick, he kneeled, it became this national controversy. People felt very differently on both sides of this issue. And the one thing, as I watched press coverage after press coverage of Colin Kaepernick, was that no one seemed to mention was that he has white parents, that he's adopted, he has white parents. I went to work and I asked people, I polled people, I'd be like, guys, do you know that Colin Kaepernick has white parents? And no one knew it. And I thought that's fascinating, because I feel, and this is just my opinion, I feel as a brown guy, being raised by white parents, you get used to a certain level of privilege because the world is viewing you through that sort of protective layer of your white parents. And then boom, you're 18, you're like on your own. And you almost imagine that you still have this like cloak, not that you're thinking about it a lot, but in situations where you've always been granted privilege, suddenly you realize, like, oh, no one, like, I'm just a black or brown guy in this world, right? Like, there's certain things here that I'm being taken out of stores. People are calling the cops on me. People are afraid of me. People cross the street when I'm walking down it to the other side. And so what I thought was, I feel like I have something to contribute to that conversation. And maybe I'll do it through my memoir that won't just be about where I live, this place, this place, this place, this place, but instead talk about race, how complex it can be. And it reminded me of the complexity that existed around race and love in my own family with my grandparents. And so it sort of gave birth to the book. Now, why now, like, right, you know, this year is my husband and I traveled to South Africa to adopt our 2.5-year-old son in January of 2020. When we arrived back, it was March in 2020. And of course, as we all know, we landed in the very week when the United States was sort of accepting the pandemic status and shutting down. So I was quarantined. We were all home for a very long time. My husband walked in. He's actually also an author. He's a fiction author, though. Much harder job. He's probably a better writer than me, too. But he came in and he said, Garen, if you don't write your memoir now while we're all home and before you go back to work, you will never write this memoir. And I thought, so annoying when your partner's right. When your person's right, it's like the worst, right? So I sat down and I said, I'm going to start. And when I started, I just never stopped. I wrote 10 hours a day for 3 months until the first draft was done. And then I had one goal only, and that was to work with the best editor that I could work with. And I got extremely lucky because I got paired with Margaret Atwood's long-term editor, Heather Sangster, who's an extraordinary human. And she and I worked for 7 months on drafts and drafts and drafts and drafts. So, I mean, it's been like such a collaboration from that standpoint. And that's why it's kind of come into the world now.
Thank you, Garen. And
Yeah.
let me ask you this. So now that it's finished, what's the one thing that you discovered about yourself that surprised you in writing your memoir?
How therapeutic it was to write it. And I mean that for all the people out there who are, maybe you don't write a book, right? Maybe you journal, I've never journaled, I've never kind of kept a diary, really, none of that stuff. But to be able to move through so many years and write about great things, but also very hard things. I didn't realize until the book was, actually out there in the world, how therapeutic the entire experience had been just for me. And of course, writing is this like very solitary experience, right? It's you and a computer, Marcie, it's you and a computer. You're sitting there for hours and hours and hours. It's all in your head. No one else knows. And then boom, it's out there in the world. And now people are contacting me from Japan, from Australia, all over, Europe and the United States and saying like, I'm reading it or whatever. And I love that. It has gotten out there. But to your point, working through things like domestic violence, having friends killed by Al-Qaeda, understanding the very complicated dynamics of my parents, my grandparents and myself. It has been a wonderful experience. And I feel like a weight lifted. Yeah.
Yeah, I can appreciate that and totally get it. Totally get it. But that leads us to my next question, or our next topic. And obviously that's adoption.
Yeah.
And I know with our guests tonight have tons of questions, but if it's all right with you, I just want to briefly just read something out of your book to start us off with, okay?
Sure.
I'll set the scene, so to speak. And this is actually number 1, abandoned.
Okay.
In the beginning of the memoir. I'm not sure when exactly it happened or how I felt. For years, I imagined that my biological mother had carried me in the early morning hours. Before the town of thank you, was awake and left me on the steps of the local hospital. Did she look back at me as she walked away? Did she cry? Did I? I have spent most of my life thinking that she gave me up because of the civil war that engulfed Sri Lanka. Too little money and no opportunity for a young baby boy. But as time has passed, it has occurred to me that perhaps she wasn't the one who left me on those steps in 1985. Could I have been taken from her? Could she still be looking for me? That's how his book opens up. And that brings me to the question of when you were abandoned and found and adopted, your parents told you your adoption story as best they knew how, with the facts that they received. Do you know the name of the orphanage? Did they disclose that to you?
I know the name of the malnutrition center where they found me, which functioned as an orphanage. Yes, I do. It was the Jayamani Malnutrition Center in Colombo.
And walk us through this experience now. I mean, you've written this amazing book with all these subjects that have touched your life and all these amazing people that you've met. You've had all these experiences. I want to really get into how you feel about being adopted. How has that changed your life? Do you think about that? Have you thought about going back to Sri Lanka and getting your story? Can you?
I think, it's what a loaded question. I mean, a great question. I absolutely will be traveling back to Sri Lanka with my kids and my husband to understand that country as an adult. In 2000, I did travel back for, the first time since I was adopted. And while it was a wonderful experience, my parents did go look for any information pertaining to my adoption and found basically nothing. I kind of I was 14 then, and I kind of understood in that moment that it just felt almost impossible. Like how would I ever? Of course, life has changed. There's DNA now, and we have sort of so many ways to go about this. I have such a positive, and I know this is not everyone's experience, so I so respect everyone's differences here, but I have such a positive association with my adoption. Because I think I grew up in all the countries I did, surrounded by so much poverty, I saw so many kids who had almost nothing, and I felt like this extreme sense of luck, but also guilt that I was somehow plucked out of that situation and then given a home. When it comes to my birth mother, I think about her in the sort of the abstract. I wonder if she's alive. And I wonder what happened. Like people always ask me, like, do you want to meet her? Maybe. I don't feel this overwhelming need to meet her, but I would love to know what happened, I guess. And especially, I want to know if she truly was the one that put me on those steps, or if I was taken from her by a parent who was not approving of her keeping a child, right? Having her child, a trafficker. I mean, when you think of her story, and when I think of her story, I think like, where is she? And I've traveled so many places, so now it's not so unrealistic to think like she's sitting somewhere in Sri Lanka. Does she think about me? Does she even know? Like, does she remember? I have to always imagine you would remember. That you would feel like no matter how many years went by, giving away a child or having a child taken from you would be just a forever thing. And sort of, I would want her to know that I'm okay. I guess that's the thing, right? For some people, it's like they want to find their birth parent to have a connection. And for me, it's not so much that, it's that I wish I could tell her if she's alive, like, I'm okay. Like, no matter what happened, I'm fine now. And, whether you intended for this to happen or not, I ended up with an extraordinary path in life that has taken me just around this world so many times. And I hope that she had other kids. I don't know. I guess I feel like if she had another kid and she kept that child, that she like fell in love with that child and that they had something that she and I could never have. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's like I almost wish I could like give her a hug and just be like, I'm good. And I have no ill will towards you. That is how I feel. And I have adopted 2 children, and 2 nights ago was my youngest son's birthday. And what I do on their birthdays is I lie in bed before I fall asleep. And this is not, intentional, but it happens every year. I think about their birth moms. I think about a woman who is 7 years younger than me in South Africa. What is she thinking tonight? Like, does she know where she does? I know she doesn't know where her son is. And I wish I could go to her and be like, I'm taking care of your son so well. I hope I'm doing right by you. And with my American son, it's like his birth mother is so much closer, but it's not an open adoption. And I think of her too, what these women must go through. I mean, Marcie, and I'm talking to the perfect person, right? I've written a whole book about your experiences as a birth mother. So I don't know that I'll ever meet it, but I don't know if it would ever even be possible because so much time has gone by and there was very little record. I talk about this in the memoir, my birthday's not real. So my birthday is fabricated. My name was made up by the government because no one knew when I was abandoned on those steps. And that's something that like a lot of people seem to almost feel weirder about than me. I've just accepted like my birthday is November 29th. That's the day we celebrate. Cool. But when people find out like that's not your actual birthday, you don't really know. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. The government said choose a birthday over these months in this window of time for your son. And that's what my parents did. So, yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question? I felt like I covered it.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Yes, you did. And if anybody has any question, go ahead and put it in the chat bar or raise your virtual hand as we're chatting. That brings me to the next scene that I want to talk about, because actually you had that on Instagram the other night and I watched it because Emmanuel had his birthday
Yes.
And I was watching it, and I was really moved by that because there was a woman singing to him. And share that.
So there was a woman named Ingrid Bacher, who is a South African woman who was a volunteer in his orphanage. And she was the closest thing he had to, a parent in that orphanage. She was there once or twice a week from the time he was born to the time he was 2.5. And they formed such a relationship. I mean, I've seen over the years now so many pictures of them together, him like cuddled with her. And she was there the day that we arrived at the orphanage in South Africa. And but I didn't get a chance to meet her. It was very quick and there was a lot going on. We ended up staying in South Africa for 6 weeks. And on the very last day, I got a text from someone because, this power of social media, right? It's bad, but it's good. There's so much that can happen over it. I posted a picture of our family and I just used the hashtag South African adoption. And it had led from one person to another person to another person and got to her. And someone texted me and said, this woman, Ingrid, really needs to talk to you. This is like 20 hours before we're supposed to get on a flight back to America. I said, absolutely. So she writes and says, I just need to say goodbye to him. Like I've been his person. She wouldn't say mother or volunteer. Like there wasn't really a good word for it. And I said, please, we're leaving. This was now the next day. I said, we're leaving in 6 hours. Please come over immediately. And it gave birth to this enormous friendship, right? She now gets to watch this little boy that she felt was almost, her little guy now grow up across the world via social media. We leave voice notes to each other constantly. He talks to her, I talk to her. And that is, the way I feel about adoption is like you're raising a person whose past you will never really know all of it. You'll never, it's an impossibility unless you got them like day 2, like we got our oldest son. And to accept that so many people have played a role in raising this human, or this person, like so many people have been in his life. And I'm so good to share him with those people and to embrace like a past that I don't know. Because to me, it's like, well, I didn't get you till you're 2.5, buddy, but like, I'm so happy there were people there that loved you. And I love that now I can have a relationship with her. I always tell her, I say, you had his past, now we have his future. And to me, it's not like about ownership of children or, any of that. It's more like just respecting their experience.
Yeah, that's that connection to their story.
Absolutely.
Because you don't have any more information. So that is his only connection.
Right. And I think because I was adopted with no information, that I so love that they have some information, if that makes sense. I see the value in that as they go older, they can have those conversations. I mean, he can turn to the South African woman and say, like, what was my life like in the orphanage? What did we do when I was like 1 and 2 and almost 3? And she can tell him, and she has pictures. I mean, that's the most amazing part of it, is she has pictures. We have now pictures. Yeah.
And we do have a question here. Linda, would you like to take yourself off of mute and ask Garen your question?
Hi, Garen. Thanks for sharing your story.
Hey, Linda. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. My question is, how come your son that you adopted from America is in a closed adoption?
Great question. Because his birth mother chose that. So with our oldest son, what happened was his birth mother delivered him, did not want to see whether she was delivering a boy or a girl. Of course, totally respect. That's an experience I would know nothing about. And the director of the agency that the hospital called came to her and said, I represent lesbian moms, gay dads, straight families, straight parents. Are there any of these that you don't want for your child? She said, I just want a loving home. We ended up being the family that he paired Mateo, as our son's name, Mateo, with. And he at different times said to her, do you want to know the family I've chosen? She said, absolutely not. So that's the reason that it is a closed adoption. It's the reason we have no information back and forth.
I see. And what if she changed her mind? How would you feel about that?
I don't know. I mean, I think I do know that she's made herself available to him when he's 18 to that he can find her through the registry that
Mhm.
in Maryland. If she contacted the director now and said, I want to meet him, my honest answer here is I don't know. I guess because it was never an option to start with, I haven't really thought through. Tori. Thank you, Linda, for this question.
You're welcome.
How we would approach it now. He's 8, he's almost 9 now. Certainly I am open to the idea. I'm not completely closed to that. Yeah, I'm open to the idea.
Yeah.
As long as, I guess I'm always thinking about, you're thinking like, how does this affect your child? And I'm sure there's pros and cons to that entire experience.
Right. Yes. Well, yeah. Thank you for answering that.
Sure. If there's something else you want to say, I'm happy to hear the story.
Well, I am a mother that's in reunion. My son, I put him up for adoption when I was young, and we're in reunion and have been for 11 years. So a lot of my involvement in adoption is I listen to a lot of people that have been adopted and their feelings about knowing their origin, and the language here is like, not always birth mother, but it could be first mother, that kind of thing. And I just hear so many talk about the importance of that. And that and this is the only other thing I'll say, because I can tell you'll ponder it. But a lot of times when one does, go through adoption, like your son's mother did, place her son for adoption, they're traumatized. There's some kind of trauma or crisis going on that happens. And so healing can occur for both when they're given the opportunity to heal through a reunion. So that's all I really wanted to say. I could go on and on, but I don't want to say too much more. But I just appreciate you listening and pondering, because your son may ask you, in a couple of years or whenever.
Right, absolutely. And listen, I appreciate your perspective. You have a very unique one, and one that's very different than mine. And we have spoken with him about his birth mom, and he knows his story. And I definitely feel that this isn't like a stagnant thing. I feel like it's an evolving thing, and especially because he's adopted from America, where there are, or not always, but maybe more recently, he was born in 2012. There are systems that allow for these kinds of reunions to happen, which I think is a wonderful thing.
Right.
That is certainly a possibility. And like I said, I'm certainly open to it. We actually were at different times kind of like, would she like to meet us? And it was just like, it has always been a no. But I respect you bringing up the point that people can change their mind. And thank you for that.
Right. And why did she feel that she could not even look at her baby when he or she was born? That's a sign of trauma. So yeah, I appreciate you thinking about it.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Linda, for the question. And I'd like to ask David, could you speak to that, please, from a professional standpoint as a therapist?
Boy, that's a huge question.
Top
Obviously,
part.
and thanks for putting me on the spot. I appreciate it. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and I applaud both parties for weighing in on it. There is a lot to reflect upon, and not only is there a lot of detail that are facts that have come to bear, but there's a lot that may never be known. So ultimately, and I'm not trying to be a therapist here, I'm not counseling anybody, it can oftentimes be about context, about learning about the times in which these things occurred, learning about the culture and the environment. And Garen, you've done a great job identifying these given the life's experiences that you've had and the different places you've lived in. understanding the context under which decisions were made on our behalf can be really empowering to us, even though we might not ever reunite or unite with any of the people in that family or that community. So I applaud the open discussion. I'm glad it's being had. I was adopted in 1960 at a time where my adoptive parents were told, just pretend he's yours and don't ever look back. Right now we're having those conversations, and it's so healthy to surface these and then to do so in a safe environment with so many interested parties with so many different experiences. To me, in and of itself, and Garen said it about writing his book, this is very therapeutic for the community. So I kind of walking gingerly here, but again, think about that context and think about how much more we know today, even about specific situations, because we're talking about them that we didn't know even 10 years ago. So very healthy. Thank you for offering me a chance to speak.
Thanks, David. Now, Garen, you want to share with them when Mateo asked you the question about Target. That was just
Yeah.
That plays into all this, his story,
Right, exactly. And David, thank you for weighing in there. Yeah, so we've always done. We've always been very open about our kids, all the kind of knowledge that we had about their stories. And so just from the time he was, we had Mateo when he was 2 days old, or that's when we first met him. And so we talked about it. It would be a bedtime story. This is how we met in this world. This is, it's very regular. It wasn't like, so cut to when he was 3 and we're in South Africa, not for the adoption. This is 2016. We're just there on a holiday, me, my husband, and Mateo. And we're hanging out at a bush lodge, and him and I are in a pool. And he just looked at me and said, did you buy me from Target? It's like, I buy you from Target, buddy. Like, what happened to our hours of stories of talking about, so, we all, for those of us that have kids, it's like, they say anything, and it's so funny, the things that come out of their mouth. I simply said, no, Target is a wonderful place. I'm there all the time, but like, they do not sell children, and I did not find you there. I did not meet you there. And I just thought it's like a really, as in the book, I hope it makes people laugh, because it made me laugh so much when he said it.
Okay, Peter, would you take yourself off mute, please, and ask your question?
Okay. Yes, I had to find the mute button. My thoughts. I just wanted to give you the other side of perspective on that, of the information and reunion and that. I'm a late discovery adoptee. I found out by DNA 4 years ago. I absolutely had to find my mother. It took me 6 weeks to work out the DNA and find out who she was. I'm in reunion. It is different. It's not. Yeah, it's good, but it's not how. There's too much lost. There is a lot lost, but I don't regret for 1 minute. I found 8 siblings.
Wow.
I'm both 5 on one side, 3 on the other. I've been in reunion with all of those. My relationship with my adoptive parents definitely changed. I'd been lied to for 59 years, and it definitely changed, and it's still changed today. Adoptive father died a few months ago. That will never repair. Had they been open with me to start with, I'm sure the relationship would have been different. But and you talk about identity and the birth certificate of the name. That's the one thing that really, really traumatizes me, that I had a fake birth certificate. I call it a fake birth certificate. It was fabricated. I wasn't born to them. And so I have a different experience, but it's, there's so many things I can talk about writing memoirs and stuff, and I don't think I'll ever have enough time left in my life, with the busy life I lead, that I'll ever get the time to sit down and do it as much as I'd like to. That question that Linda gave, that was brilliant. It opens up so much stuff. My mother was looking for me at the time. I found my oldest brother first, and he'd known about my adoption for 3 weeks. My mother had confided in him and her husband of 55 years that I existed. So, all the stars lined up. But most important to me, culture, most important. Father was Italian. My mother, Scottish and Australian Aboriginal. A lot of cultures, a lot of stuff to get my head around there. So, I just wanted to share that, and openness is the best. I'm a long-term foster carer.
Okay.
I never ever thought about adopting any child in my care. I'm not against caring for children. I've had one child with us for about 10 years, not a child anymore, nearly an adult. But always realised that they had their own family, and people often say to me, "Oh, what, how, but if they went back, wouldn't you be devastated?" Mm-hmm. And truth is, no. Truth is, that's what I want. I've had it happen once that I've been able to facilitate someone go back while they're in my care, and that was a joyous occasion to me that they were able to reunite and get back to the original family. So maybe it's just a different way of looking at things, but definitely not against care of children. I've got 3 of my own grandchildren here at the moment I'm caring for while their mother recuperates operation. So you can hear them. All right. No, I'm glad you're open and talking, and it's good that we can sort of talk, even though we're from completely different ends of the spectrum.
Sure, and like, thank you for telling your story. Honestly, it's fascinating to me. I mean, I've just to hear it, really, any of you that are sitting out here telling your stories to me, I find it very interesting. And I do sometimes wonder, like, if I had been lied to for so long and then found out in the way that I feel you just expressed, how differently I might feel. Maybe not differently, but I have to imagine it would feel quite different. So thanks for sharing that, man. Appreciate it, Peter.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, I think Megan is next, Garen.
Hi, Megan.
I haven't unmuted myself in a long time on one of these, so I've forgotten how to work with this particular iPad. Hello, it's
Hi.
nice to meet you, Garen.
Yeah. So nice to meet you.
My real life now. And I've actually been following some of the Sri Lankan adoptees, and your story is like fascinating to me. I'm 4 years in reunion. I actually am a Southern woman. I don't know if you can hear that in my voice. I'm told that I sound Californian. My parents my adoptive parents are from the North. So I was extremely displaced with a Northern mother from Michigan, sort of a brute woman in the American South. And I'm curious about, so you said something, I haven't been able to read your book yet. And you said something about being in Louisiana, but that you didn't identify as, being American. So you didn't really spend time in Louisiana. You were saying your parents were there, and then you did not spend time there, correct?
Sort of. My parents are both from Louisiana, but the first country I moved to after Sri Lanka was South Africa. And so I think if I'm going back, if I think of any, and stop me please if I'm not answering it correctly, but we would travel from Africa back to Louisiana every summer, like on home leave. And that was my introduction to America. My understanding of the United States, as a kid, was always to Louisiana. And so, yes, that, and what did you said something else that I want to touch on. What was it?
Well, I'm careful to like offend anyone from the South. But my growing up in the South was very problematic. I've always felt entirely displaced. I'm still living here in Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay, nice.
With our wonderful civil rights history. And now I'm like an extremely marginalized person. I actually have a service dog in training at this time for mobility. And I've just been learning more and more how much this area does not understand still other people's, I guess, ways of life generally. And there's lots of people here who do. But the etiquette around service dogs, and when I try to get in conversations around adoption here, it is rather difficult. So I've relied heavily on the adoption community online at this time. There are no support groups here. There is no outreach. There is one support group here. Technically, it's not a support group. I don't really know what they call themselves, but it runs through an adoption agency and it's led by a social worker who polices everything that everyone says. So I really have been trying to reach out, especially to the Indiana conference, and kind of find a place. But my question, I think, is you said, I'm trying to go back. You said, I think for a long time, I just thought America was Southern culture. Mm-hmm. And I definitely sort of experienced that, although I knew, that my mother grew up in this other culture. She was also a very conservative woman. Yet we grew up in a church that had people on all sides of politics. And so I got a very confusing, I think, idea of where my family was politically, what they believed in, what they really thought adoption was until I went through Union. And so I think what I'm asking and commenting on here is how did that idea of America being Southern culture affect you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for that story, and hi. No, I appreciate it. Well, I mean, right off the bat, it was, I think, in one of the opening chapters when I'm first in Louisiana, my parents asked, so what's gone on? What's changed here? And my grandfather said, you can't go over to Paul Mallard Road now, the blacks live that way. And, I was 6 maybe when I heard that. And so sort of to your point, yes, I think it's fair to say the South has always been behind the rest of the nation in terms of progressive issues, progressive viewpoints. And certainly in the early 90s, I mean, this was not a conversation. we're in a very different world, right? Still a lot of challenging things, but progress has been made. It was, as a brown kid who was, you have to imagine I was a brown kid growing up in Africa surrounded by black people, now coming back to an exclusively white town in the South, and not understanding why people had such a resistance or a racist attitude towards black people. Because, back in South Africa, it's all everyone was black. When I lived in the Gambia, everyone was black. I mean, I always say my parents were the minorities in our family. It wasn't me. It wasn't my sister. Our nannies, our drivers, our friends were black. So coming back to Louisiana, or, you could say Alabama, right? Either it's very culturally very similar. It was hard to understand, why do people feel this way? Why do people live in such a segregated way? Why were there no black families on the street where my grandmother lived? And why did they not have any brown or black families? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I'm kind of having trouble piecing all of these thoughts together, but your story definitely hit some specific notes for me. Right. And I think anyone that is from the South, if they're being honest, recognizes that there's a lot more work to be done there, right? Probably all over this country. But it does seem somehow in the South, racist attitudes have prevailed for so much longer. Do you feel that way? Do you feel when you travel out of Alabama that you see a difference? I do. I think that also lately, the concept that I've been pondering a lot is just conforming. And that I think in the suburbs here, especially, there's a huge tendency to feel such a need to conform. And I think I fought for a very long time against conformity growing up, which I think in a lot of ways only brought me more harm in my culture, in our culture. I think if I'd lived in a city here, it might have been a little different. But yes, I also believe that my parents in particular fit better, much to my chagrin, in this area than probably I would have been. I probably just would have been a better fit in a different family. I am still close to my adoptive parents, but there's definitely a lot of ethical issues that I've come into. So it's hard to parse apart at this point in time. Still just 4 years in reunion.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that.
Thank you for your connection and congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much, Megan. I appreciate it. Thanks for reaching out.
Absolutely.
Okay, who's next? See, I don't see anybody's hand up here. Oh, sorry, Diana, go ahead. Oh, you're still on mute. Diana, can you take, there you go.
Yes, fine. Hi.
Hey.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Garen, thank you so much for sharing your story. I love listening to everybody's story. Our stories are all different. I found out very late in life that I wasn't even born in America. I was born in Canada, and I didn't know that. I was 38 years old. My husband had passed away early. My parents who raised me had both already been passed when I found out. And I hear I'm raising 2 kids. And a man out in Las Vegas said, oh, you want me to find your parents for you? And that's what opened up a can of worms for me. I was raised in New York, and the part I've had a problem with, I was raised by a Orthodox Jewish family. I married Irish Catholic, so my father probably rolling in his grave. And my brother and I, who my brother is not biological, and he never knew that, were both very dark skinned. My parents were very, very white, very blonde. And I have a lot of great cousins that I'm very friendly with, but there was always a disconnection. And I never knew why, especially being a late adoptee and then finding out. I have found out who my mother is. I found that out in 1994. And I'm still working on that because the bottom line is, fast forward, is she dead? Is she not dead? Is she alive? And it was just a lot to find out. Found out, she traveled the world at a very young age. Went all over, and there was no adoption. And why would somebody I was never adopted. I'm part of a black market babies. Have you heard of black market?
Not specifically in those terms. Do you mean like someone who's trafficked?
Yeah, they call it trafficking now, I think, but back in I was in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, black market. I'm an advocate for black market. It still goes on.
Okay.
Now it's called human trafficking.
Yeah.
But it's also black market. And I'm Karen Balcom. She's a lady who's wrote a lot of books on black market. And also there's a gentleman I've been in touch with in Montreal. It took me 2 years to reach him, but he's also a black market baby, and his story is on YouTube. So I am writing a book. It didn't start off, how can I write a book? I don't know how I could write a book, but I tried doing it with somebody help me. And then everyone said, you could do this yourself because you have to tell the story. You know the names. I'm the one that's been making the trips to Vancouver. I'm the one that's been going to Montreal. And you also talk about, yes, I was raised, I'm white, but I was raised Jewish, and my biological parents were not of the Jewish faith. And I've dealt with a lot of anti-Semitism, especially living in the South. You don't want to tell anybody you're Jewish.
I mean, there's Certainly that, yes.
I mean, if I was back in Florida, yeah, I was on the west coast of Florida, it's different. But here in South Carolina, you want to zip it. And I'm sure Megan is, I overheard her talking, and I know she knows what I'm talking about. I mean, there's just so many things. That's why listening to different people's stories, you get ideas, you remember something. But I guess what I really want to know is, how do you turn somebody over? How do you cross the border after you have a baby and bring the baby across the border? I mean, what was she thinking?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then my mother that I knew passed away. She got sick when I was 9 and passed away before I was 11. But my father, he had a number of years he could have told me, especially once I was going to have a baby myself. Never said anything. But, you know, I don't know. I'm just talking, but I just, you know.
Write your memoir. I mean, that's a
Oh
fascinating.
yeah, I've been writing. I'm like 90% done.
Okay.
Like I'm up to year 2017.
Oh,
It
no,
goes back,
okay.
it starts from 1993, so
Yeah.
it's a lot. So no, it's just very interesting, and that's why it's, everyone's been great. And I met David Quint, which I know you know him. Originally, I lived out in Denver for a little over a year, and I used to go to the adoption group there. But the problem is, being that I was never adopted, I am amazed how many people don't know what that means if you've never been adopted, but yet your parents weren't your parents. Does that kind of make sense at all?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, your story is, I mean, I find it very interesting. And
Well, I'll tell you one thing I know about my mother for sure, because I have pictures. My mother was the first woman in North America to be photographed in 1953 wearing a bikini. And she was supposed to be 18 and she was 16. And so they put the pictures in the archives till the 1960s. And now every year when the anniversary date of that bikini, it's in all the newspapers in Canada.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was, that's before she had me, but still. But she went on to college. She went to McGill. I did find that out. She spoke 5 languages. I know that.
Did she have any more children? Do you have any siblings?
No, I was told she died at 29. And there were 5 kids and she was the youngest. And she supposedly died at 29 and she was healthy. But nobody ever goes to the cemetery, but she was very close to her family. I have pictures. She was very, very close to her family. And they never went to the cemetery. And they're Ukrainian and Russian and Austrian. And I don't know. Don't you always go to the cemetery back then? I don't know. 1967? I don't know. The cemetery was 10 minutes away and she was always close. I have met my aunts. Of course, at the beginning it went well, and then they didn't want to have anything to do with me. Once my grandmother died, they thought maybe I was, my grandmother died. So, they thought I wanted something, but I never wanted anything but answers. So.
Well, you let me know when you write your book, because I'll absolutely read it.
Oh yeah, well, I want to read yours too.
Like 4 things that are just fascinating. I mean,
but thank you so much, and thanks for, I usually don't go off at mute. I'm kind of like sit back and take it all in, but once I start to talk, Marcie, watch out.
Well, this is real laid back and real informed.
No, what's really good about it is when I know people, I'm great when I know people. Or listen, I used to have to give lectures at a store, and I could get up and do it. But when you don't know anybody, but a lot of you are beginning to look familiar to me, so it actually becomes easier, believe it or not. So, but thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thanks for sharing that.
And thanks. I want to read your book.
I'll read yours too. Keep writing it.
Okay.
And that reminds me, Garen is going to be giving away an autographed copy of his book to one lucky winner. And I believe before I do that, Meredith has a question. And then I'll.
Hi, I'm Meredith.
Hey, Meredith.
I'll lower my hand.
Hey.
What was the woman's name that was just talking? Diana?
Yes.
Diana? it's something about being raised in a Jewish household because I found out that I was Jewish. I love to talk. I can't shut up. So I'm going to try to make it.
You talk with your hands too.
I'm going to try to make it brief. But I found out my dad wasn't my dad through DNA, and that my biological father is of Ashkenazi Jewish descent. And hi, Barb. And that was like a whole, I have anger that a whole culture was kept from me. And I guess my question for you is, where's your anger? Where's your anger? How are you so calm? I feel like maybe because your adoptive parents were so understanding and knowledgeable about other cultures and had been exposed to other cultures and other places in the world, that maybe, I don't know, that maybe you're one of the lucky ones who skated that anger thing of like, just, I feel a sense of injustice that was done with zero of my choosing. I didn't decide who I was born into or whatever. And it always amazes me to hear adult adoptees that's never been an issue for them. And I guess it's just fascinating to me. It's just fascinating. And I don't know. I have a college friend and he's from Sri Lanka. He gets mad at me every time I forget. And I'm like, you're not Indian, right? He's like, no, Sri Lankan. Oh. But you all have some of the similar like gestures and like the genetic mirroring. I'm like, they both need to do DNA so I can find out if they're related. Because in my head, they're related.
Send them my way. Who knows?
Did you do your DNA?
I have not. I have not. I know. Yeah, I have not.
Do you have any interest? Like you're not curious. You didn't say anything about, maybe I have a sibling out there. Maybe I don't.
Yeah, and I have to say candidly, like a part of me feels bad. Like sometimes I don't have like this burning desire necessarily. I don't know, guys. I mean, listen, I'll go to your first question, which was, where's the anger? Here's what I always say. I recognize not everyone here is adopted internationally, right? And my situation was sort of like that, but my parents were actually living in the country. But I think when you're adopted from, let's just take an international adoption from one country, and then you're brought to, one American town, and that's where you grow up your whole life, let's just say. That's a very different experience than being adopted from a country and then moving to 6 different countries and living in a wide range of cultures. And like I said, my white parents always being the minority, they were sort of forced to like deal with all of these issues. Really, they were kind of under the spotlight, less so us. I do always say, I think I would have had a very different experience had these 2 people from Louisiana adopted me from Sri Lanka, raised me in Luling, Louisiana. I think I would have had a completely different attitude towards things. I would have been around nobody that looked like me, subject to all of the sort of racist attitudes that existed or exist currently. And just with very little understanding of like, where did I come from and how did this all happen? And all I can speak to is my experience, right? I feel bad saying this now. Like I am very happy that I was adopted, and I feel like I love my parents so much, and I also like I guess I carry a ton of guilt as a result of being adopted, because I got to see so many kids living in poverty in Africa, in the Middle East, just all over, who I know would have loved to have been adopted. Okay, so and again, that's just my experience, but I think being around so many kids who didn't get homes always made me feel like a level of like, I should be grateful. And I know that there are people that will slam me for saying this. Listen, I get it, right? because we all have our own experiences and it's very different for each of us. But I just sort of felt like you were adopted, you were left at the steps of a hospital during a war. You could have died. You didn't. You were taken here. They said you're too malnutritious, malnourished. Took you to another place. You just happened to be adopted. And I kind of just felt like make the most of your life in whatever way you can, because you almost didn't get that chance. That is how I feel. Listening to so many of you tonight, it is really a wonderful experience for me to listen to you guys. I'm learning a lot, I'm learning a lot. And in each of your stories, they're so different than mine. There's no comparison. And I think that's the point where I think Marcie would say this, like, no one's here, right, to compare their stories and say like your situation is better than mine or whatever. It's entirely different. And your anger, you said I think you used the word injustice, right? Your feeling of injustice, that's so valid, man. That's so, like, I can hear it, and in your telling of it, I can see it. It's not my experience, but like it's very real, and I can see that. And thank you for telling me about it.
Thank you. Thank you for validating it.
What's your name?
Did you see the Meredith?
Meredith.
Did you see the movie Lion?
Yes, that was hard to watch. Yes.
So the wild part about my story is one of the wild parts is that the dad that raised me, he and his high school sweetheart had placed a baby girl for adoption back in it was 1970s or something in Ohio. But the day of that baby girl was born was the day that he found his mother in that story, February 13th. So like I watched the story with my sister. It was February 12th, excuse me. But it was goosebumps, the whole movie. It was very, very moving for me. So
yeah, that's a wonderful film, wonderful story. I mean, yes, very sad in many ways. I think I cried through most of it. I don't really even cry at movies that often, but I was like,
okay, that makes me feel a little better for some reason.
That I'm not just like happy about everything. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
Meredith. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Meredith. Well, we're running out of time here, and I'd love to chat more, and I've got some questions that I didn't even get asked, but we really appreciate you coming on tonight, Garen, and thank you for sharing your story. And again, we want to remind everybody that the name of the book is You'll Always Be White to Me, and we didn't talk about it. And actually, we decided that we really weren't. It's a spoiler, I think, to really get into that. So you really have to read the book and learn more and get more of Garen's story. But you can purchase that again on Amazon. I think Jennifer's already put the link in the chat room. You can contact you on IG. You're a big IG guy at Garen Wade, GARWADE on Instagram. And if you do get his book, make sure you take a picture and put it on Instagram with YABWTM. I think Jennifer's going to add that in there too. So we have all that information. So, but before we close, we want to do the announcement who won the book, and then we have some closing comments, and then Garen, don't leave yet. Okay, hang with me. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think Jennifer's told me our winner is, Megan, you got pulled out. Megan, you there? Did she leave? She did not, did she? No, there she is. Can you hear me, Megan? Okay. She might have went to get a drink. She's still there. Okay, we'll reach out to her and make sure that you get her contact information so you can go ahead and send that out to her.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We really appreciate you coming on tonight. We really enjoyed having you.
It's my pleasure, really. Thank you so much, you guys.
Yeah.
For all those of you who spoke, I mean, really, that was very insightful for me. And I have to say, I haven't had a ton of I haven't been very involved in the adoption community over my life. I just for whatever reason haven't. And this book has led me to situations, other interviews, where I have met more people, and it's profoundly interesting to me. It really is. Obviously there's so much to cover in Marcie, and I couldn't get through all of it tonight, but one thing that you guys probably don't know is my father's also adopted. So it's sort of in our family. My dad's adopted, I'm adopted, my sister's adopted. My 2 sons are adopted. And so I feel like we have 3 generations of adoptees in our family. It's a very different picture. And for one of you who is like, and I love that comment, like, where's your anger? I mean, I think from my perspective, it's just each person has someone else to look to who had that experience. It's not a solitary experience for us. In many ways, that probably has informed the way that I view adoption, and probably the reason I adopted my own children as well. So yeah, I just really appreciate tonight and all of you who stayed up late to be here, and then for those of you who reached out and spoke. Also, listen, I'm not like the best tech guy, and I'm seeing so many like messages at the bottom, like "Thank you, Garen," and somebody wrote me a comment earlier, and I have not even clicked that. So I hope I don't know, I can go through and see all the comments after and write people. Or
what we will do, we will send you a printout of the chat room, so you'll have all the information for tonight.
I would love that. Thank you so much for your time, you guys. I'm very appreciative.
Thank you. Okay, so don't go away.
I won't.
Jennifer,
Yes.
you have a closing slide for me?
Yes, I do. I'm going to put up 2. Just want to remind you, all of our events, I just dropped it on Eventbrite. There's a link out there to see all of our events. But our next Putting Yourself Together After Reunion with Dr. Joyce McGuire Pavo is coming up on August 10th. Registration is available for that. Our conference registration is also open. You'll find that out there. And then next week's happy hour, where did it go? On my screen. I thought I had it. Let me open it again. I don't know. Go ahead and talk about it, Marcie, and I'll go find the slide.
Okay, we have our very own Sharon Cummins. Sharon, raise your hand, take yourself off mute. You're going to be joining us next Friday with, and I don't have the slide yet, so here we go. Okay. Sharon Cummins and Jeanette Mooney joining us next Friday at our regular time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And they're going to talk about legislation, their relationship. You want to say something real quick, Sharon?
Okay. Yes.
Oh, you put yourself on mute.
Okay, I did. I hiccupped it again just as I started. We shared the secrets told, fast unfold when we got the law changed in Missouri. And we actually spoke at the conference that we had for Missouri. And this is just a little bit of telling before we got the law changed and then how we worked together and our story. And it's, we've worked together all those years, and it's just pretty insightful about how we could work together in 21 years. And I knew she was birth mom. She did not know I was birth mom, but I could not share it with her until my daughter found me. 21 years we kept the secret. I kept the secret from her. So that's how it starts out. So it's a kind of amazing story.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that next Friday night. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Marcie.
Okay. That's, unless anybody has any last minute comments, that's it for us. We appreciate you joining us this evening. Like I said, we'll be back at our regular scheduled time next Friday at 7 p.m. Everybody have a great weekend.
Bye, guys.